Welcome to the Bookish Hour with your hosts, Sarah E. Burr and J.C. Kenney. And we are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Bookish Hour. I'm Sarah Burr.
And I am J.C. Kenney, and we are thrilled to welcome you all to a wonderful Thursday night, and especially because, tonight's episode of the Bookish Hour is brought to you by the fabulous Trixie Silvertail, USA Today best-selling paranormal cozy mystery author. Let me try that again. Live TV right here. Wheels and Dirty Deals. Silvertail's upcoming release is available for pre-order right now. You can find Wheels and Dirty Deals in both ebook and paperback formats in all Amazon stores. And now that I've completely mangled Trixie's promo here, let's get the party started. Sarah, I think it's time to get bookish.
Yes, and have no fear because we have some more shout outs for Trixie during our show today. And she's also going to be joining us to celebrate the release of Wheels and Dirty Deals in the month of February. So we'll have her back to be able to talk about her newest cozy mystery from Harper and Moon Investigations. Welcome everyone to the Bookish Hour. Hello Susan, hello DHB. Thank you so much guys for being here. We are going to talk murder and mystery this evening. We love it. That's our bread and butter. We are joined by the very talented Matt Koss to talk about his Gough Landon Mainly Mysteries. And I personally am super excited because Mainly Mysteries, as you may be able to tell from the name, takes place in my home state of Maine. So it's good to talk to a fellow Mainer for once. Matt, most of the time we have a lot of Midwest folks who are from JC's neck of the woods, so it's cool to talk to somebody who is familiar with the Down East area and the Maine woods themselves. So welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's pretty fantastic to be here chatting with the two of you who are two great authors yourselves, and I look forward to the next hour.
Yes,
and it's cool.
Yeah, it's gonna fly by, and we have Farmhouse Reader chiming in the chat saying howdy to everybody. Matt, while we are all kind of settling in for the evening and pulling up our chairs to listen to this conversation, any chance you can talk a little bit about your life prior to writing, because you have been you've had quite like a lot of cool career experiences over the course of your lifetime. So how did you get started, and then what brought you to writing?
I'd have to say that I've always written, so there wasn't really much before the writing life. I'm kind of what you would call an overnight success story. I wrote my first historical fiction book about Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution and finished it in 1991. And a short 29 years later, it was my first traditionally published book. So, we worked on the writing craft in between, but in the meantime, I did lots of different things. I owned some businesses. I owned a video store, and I owned a fitness club. And I owned a bookstore called the Coffee Dog Bookshop, which only lasted a few years, but lives on in the pages of the Mainly Mystery books. So it does go on there. I did that for about 10 years, owned those businesses, and then I sold them, and I moved on, and I became, just the golden position of being a middle school social studies teacher.
So,
thank you for that. That's huge.
That's good.
That's huge. Believe me, I've got two grown kids. I know how challenging it can be to not only raise them, but especially try to teach them. So thank you for that.
Yes, I call those my charitable years. I think in my bio I said after 10 years of that I was finally paroled. And dedicated myself to writing. So when I got that first book published in 2020, I kind of had the door open, and in April, my 17th published book will come out.
Oh,
Nice. That
wow.
is cool. So I'm curious, that's from 91 to, not that many long years ago, to when this series, happened. That's a long time, kind of, I don't want to say a gap, but, that is quite a gap between publishing experiences. You obviously never gave up that dream, that goal. Can you talk about why returned to it or kept at it after all those years?
Um, yeah, I continued writing in those years, even though it was busy between the jobs and raising four kids and coaching every sport imaginable and this and that. So, living life. But I did write the first two mainly mysteries um, by the early 2000s
Okay.
and just did not get them published. And then around 2009, I started writing a historical fiction book about Joshua Chamberlain and the Civil War.
Oh,
It dovetailed nicely into what I was teaching. I'd taken a 2-week course at Bowdoin College.
I've heard of that place. Inside joke, folks. We'll talk about that later.
About teaching biography in the classroom, and that got me excited to write that. And so 6 years later, in 2015, I self-published that book because I said, okay, I'm finally getting somewhere. This is pretty good. And then in 2016, I got a chance to visit Cuba, which gave
Wow.
me the onus to come back and, you know, remaster and redo that book and, make it better and make it publishable, which I did and found the publishing home in 2020. So, writing has been a piece of my life since I was 8 or maybe earlier. But, a lot of other things have taken place. And I guess I always figured, I can write when I'm 70, 80, 90. Let's do some of the things that, might be harder to do when you're 80 or 90. So that's kind of my life in a nutshell.
I would, and because this is the Mainer in me, I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind, Matt, sharing a little bit, maybe of a history fact for our audience members who may not be familiar with Joshua Chamberlain and why he is so special.
Joshua Chamberlain's probably the most famous Mainer. He's competing with Stephen King, I guess. But the two of them are duking it out. But he, was born in Brewer, but lived most of his adult life in Brunswick, Maine, where he was a professor at Bowdoin College. And then he went on to gain fame during the Civil War and rose up through the ranks, and amongst other things, held the line at Gettysburg that some people argue might have been, the moment that pivoted the Civil War
Oh,
in
wow.
favor of the North.
Hmm.
And some would argue that that's not true, but he led a desperate charge downhill to break the tide of the Confederates coming up. And he did many other fantastic exploits. The book I wrote is based on just his Civil War years. But when he came home to Brunswick afterwards, he did many other fantastic things as well. He was a 4-term governor of the state and just had his hands in everything. So he was a pretty fascinating individual.
I will second that because, and when I went to college, so I went to college outside of Maine, and I kind of thought like, oh, everybody knows Joshua Chamberlain because I vividly remember, I think it was my 5th grade history class where we were assigned a role for everybody that was in the 20th Maine, and we reenacted the formation, which was kind of like it was an L shape that they used to kind of charge ahead. And, everybody was given their roles. I believe I was Captain Joseph. Oh, I can't remember his last name. But I remember, I was just like, oh, the 20th Maine, or the 120th Maine. And it was just like,
No,
it
it was
was
20th. 20th
20th.
is correct.
So that's something that that's my proud Maine story.
Yeah,
It's
I think that's big in fifth grade.
It,
I know in
yeah.
Brunswick they do the reenactments of the different things, and
Hmm.
everybody's given a role. And my kids were all varying degrees of generals and colonels and things
Hmm.
like that. So I worked in a tent. My wife and I were doctors working in a tent for
Oh.
the Civil War
Hmm.
reenactment with the fifth graders.
nice. Nice. Well, like I said, folks, by the way, I told both of these two that since this was going to be a Maine love fest, that I was just going to go sit in the corner, but I'm just kind of horning in here on all the Maine love. And this is just a reminder that we all need to go visit Maine because it truly is a beautiful state. But I want to talk about a specific portion of Maine that you mentioned, Matt, Brunswick, because not only is it a real place, but is a fixture in your mainly books here. So, can you talk a little bit about Brunswick? Why did you choose that location for this series? And then maybe introduce Langdon to us all.
I guess one of the problems I ran into with the first book I wrote, which was the I Am Cuba book about Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution, is I realized that I was lacking in sincerity because I'd never been to Cuba. So when I decided to move on and write some mysteries, I told myself, well, why don't we write about something which is where I live, Brunswick, Maine. So the Coffee Dog Bookshop is something that I owned and is featured in these books. Goff Langdon is a private investigator slash bookstore owner in Brunswick, Maine, because neither job is going to provide him enough of an income to live on. Because of small town Brunswick, it doesn't support a bookstore or a private investigator. But if he's able to put these two things together, he's able to make a living. And that kind of is a neat little twist of Goff Langdon and whatnot. So, there's and I've really enjoyed writing about the town that I live in, and I changed the names of all the places. I got to keep Bowdoin College the same because it's a fixture in Brunswick, but and I am able to keep my bookstore uh, the same name because I figure I won't sue myself. So, but I changed the names of all the other restaurants and places in town, and people have had fun trying to guess. There's a long time restaurant in Brunswick called Fat Boys, and I changed that to Hog Heaven. And so that's the sort of thing that people are like, is that that? And that's an easy one. And there's others that are a little more difficult. Um, but at the same time, you run into some difficulties writing about your own hometown. Probably one of the worst that I had was a couple years ago. I was down in the Carolinas actually, and I got a phone call, and there was this 94-year-old lady on the phone, and her son had found my phone number, and she wanted to call and tell me how much she loved my mainly mystery books.
Oh.
And she went on to talk about, and then she started explaining that a lot of it takes place around where she lives and this and that. And she starts explaining where she lives and right down to the building on a certain street.
Oh, wow.
And I realized that just 3 or 4 chapters earlier in what I was currently writing, I'd killed somebody in her building. And I felt absolutely horrible about that. And I
Wow.
didn't tell about it.
Oh
And I
man.
hadn't heard, so
I think she would probably find that to be as a mystery lover, I feel like I would be honored by that. Like, oh,
yeah.
they wrote a crime in my building. So
Yeah.
in that line, Matt, why mystery? Why were you drawn to that particular genre to, write Goff's story?
I've always loved mysteries. I've always loved history. I was a history major in college. I love reading historical fiction, but I really grew up and I would say 9 out of 10 mystery writers will tell you that they started with the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew
Hmm.
and Encyclopedia Brown and The Great Brain and all of these great, young adult books or, you know, and then kind of graduated up to some fantastic people like Elmore Leonard and Carl Hyacin.
There we go.
So loving the colorful characters that are presented in those last two authors is something that I really like to model myself after and try and create a colorful cast of characters in my books.
Would you like to?
That's one of the things I'll admit when you read authors, like Leonard and Hyacin, who folks know are huge influences on my writing. First off, whenever I read them, I thought, oh my God, I should just quit writing because I'll never write anything nearly as good as them. But it's so much fun. And I think that's one of the things, and Sarah, I'd love to get your take too, is that when we write these murder mysteries, at least for Sarah and I, and we've talked about this often too, about how the good guys win in the end, but it still is so much fun to write these over the top, bizarre characters that may or may not really exist in real life. So that's one of the things I love about, mysteries. What about you, Sarah?
Oh, I mean, I always kind of live vicariously through my characters. Like their lives are the lives that I wish that I could have, or that I had the audacity to lead. I don't know. But yeah, making those big personalities is like they're the ones that stick out the most to me in my own writing. Like Jasper Hastings from my trending topic mysteries is forever like one of my, if not the favorite character to write, just because of his larger than life personality and how much I wish that I was like Jasper. But there are so many, you have such a fun collection of supporting characters, Matt, in your stories. I'm wondering if you can kind of share with our audience members the folks that Goff comes to rely on during his investigations, because he's got some fun characters that have some fun nicknames too.
Now, first of all, would you follow Jasper's face regime and spend so much time doing the makeup at the beginning and the moisturizers and all of those things?
I would certainly. I try to adhere to that myself because like I gotta take care of my skin. So he's definitely he's someone that I kind of definitely use a lot of my own silliness in.
So I guess the cast of characters, we have Goff Langdon, who we've talked about. He's sort of known as a slacker detective. He always has a dog. In the first few books, his dog is a chocolate lab named the Coffee Dog, and then later on, the Coffee Dog gets replaced by just plain Dog. It's small D, Dog. But he's, in Brunswick, running a bookstore, being a PI. At the beginning, his sole employee is Chabal, who there's a romantic spark between the two of them. He is good friends with a lawyer named Jimmy 4x4, who years earlier had been a high-powered attorney in New York City, a graduate of Rutgers University, and he was working 7 days a week and billing for 18 hours a day. And one day he just broke and drove north and traded his BMW in for a van wagon and made it as far as Bodenham, Maine, where it broke down. And he set out his shingle and became a small town hippie lawyer who likes to smoke a little bit of weed, and but he's a brilliant legal mind. We have the hulking bear of a cop, Bartholomew, known as Bart, who's very good friends with Langdon. He's very gruff and but Langdon's one of the few people that knows he likes to read poetry, which he would never, give that across and allow that to happen. Another good friend is a bartender that through the book moves on to owning the bar that he starts as a bartender at, which is a restaurant, and his name is Richam. Interestingly enough, Some of these names came from my daughter, who was a very young child at the time, and in the bathtub would have little people that she would play with, and she would name them. And she would, I think, skewer real names. So they became names in my books, Richum and Shabal, to name a few.
Oh, that is so cool.
So these are, and she might be watching now. I don't know. So she might be upset with me for, you know, talking about her young bathtub days.
Well, I was
No,
saying, I was
she's not going to be
thinking,
upset with you. She's going to be calling you and say, "Dad, okay, now I need some royalty love. I've got some skin in the game here."
Yeah.
well, the funny thing about the name Richum is that to me sounds like a very Maine name, and so like I am like surprised that was something that just. But that's probably how a lot of Maine names started, and one thing that I would love to know, Matt, because you do have some of your characters that are out-of-staters, they're transplants, and one thing that I have always, so I was not born in Maine. I moved there when I was 7 years old, and because I was not born in Maine, I was always from away, and I still am from away, even though I spent a lot of my life there. How does that maybe that's my neck of the woods, but does that type of mentality play into your mysteries? And if so, how does it kind of affect the investigations and maybe the suspects or the people who are suspects in your stories?
Well, I didn't move to Maine until I was 8. And that was actually Madison, Maine, which is north and west of where Appleton is.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Up by Skowhegan. So, and I never got that feel too much of being somebody from away. I felt like I fit in with the Milltown kids just fine. Maybe I was a little gruffer.
Oh man,
But
that was not my experience.
Well, so kind of along that line, one of the things that I'm real curious about is, when another Maine author who is a wonderful member of the crime writing community, Bruce Robert Coffin, he has his John Byron police procedurals based in Portland. And so one of the things that I would be curious to get your take on, Matt, is you really get the sense from those books that Portland is like almost it may be in Maine, but it's vastly different from the rest of the state. Kind of like here in Indiana, where I'm from, we have the region, which is the part of Indiana that's right up by Chicago. And that is more Chicago, Illinois than it is in Indiana. So you have this 6-book series, 6 so far, set in Brunswick, Maine. Can you give us a little geography lesson for those of us who aren't real familiar with Maine? Whereabout is that? And do you believe there is kind of, depending on where you are in Maine, there are different cultures or the lifestyles are different?
Absolutely. Well, Brunswick is about a half an hour up the coast from Portland,
Okay.
just past LL Beans.
Okay.
Those are generally the two things people know about Maine is Portland and LL Bean. So I actually live 4 miles from LL Bean. I'm right on the Freeport Brunswick line.
Oh, nice.
And so I'm very close to LL Bean. So about half an hour past Portland. And there's definitely two different Maines. And it's not just Portland, although in my books I talk about, everything south of Portland is really a suburb of Boston with creeping urbanization. But it's coastal versus inland. So there's a lot of people from away that either have moved to Maine or summer in Maine or vacation in Maine. And they generally do that on the coast. They don't do that in Appleton or Madison very much. But in Brunswick, very much so. In this series, I, hinge upon that, how the summer is so vital to Brunswick businesses because the people from away bring so much money, but it's also really a hassle for them because the people from away are here crowding the streets and, making the lines long at the restaurants and whatnot. I have another series which is set in Port Essex, Maine, which is a fictionalized version of Booth Bay Harbor, Maine.
Oh, nice.
And it's much more like that there, where, Booth Bay Harbor is a real summer, destination for millionaires who have huge mansions and come to them, a couple weeks every summer or something like that, versus this real blue collar working community of fishermen. So, there's this huge polarization there that is very interesting to pull upon. I'm sorry to see that Byron series stopped with Bruce's books, but he does have a new series coming out later this year, the Detective Justice series set in northern Maine, so that'll be exciting.
Yeah, that whole coastal versus inland. I went to a high school that had a couple coastal towns mixed with the inland towns, and it was you just knew where people were from.
And you were from away.
Yes. It was funny. People are like, Sarah, we thought you were from, oh gosh, what's the private school? Oh man.
Lincoln Academy?
Lincoln Academy. They thought, it's like, oh, we thought that you had transferred from Lincoln Academy or something like that, just because it's like, oh, like you didn't have that, like the inland mentality. And maybe that was why my inland experience, I was always kind of an outsider for folks. But the Booth Bay area is so cool. I was there over the holidays at the Botanical Gardens doing the Christmas light walk. And we went into Booth Bay Harbor for dinner afterwards. And I'm just walking along those streets thinking, how do people drive in these during the summertime? Because we were driving through it in the wintertime, and it's like these roads, JC, are like, it was wild. I couldn't believe that we fit, like we were in a small little sedan, and it's like we barely could fit on some of them. It was wild.
They're narrow and twisting and hilly.
But gosh, it's beautiful. So beautiful.
I just finished my 6th book in that series, the first draft of it. And we end in January with an ice storm in Port Essex / Booth Bay Harbor. So that's the opposite of the summer crowds. There's not many people on the streets in January in Booth Bay Harbor.
Well, that's kind of one of the things that kind of tees us up perfectly, Matt. Before we get too far into the show, we're about halfway through, so I just want to remind everybody. Hey, if you got any comments, any questions for Matt about his writing, not just, his Langdon series, but, all of his other things, please feel free to put them in the comments, and we will relay them to Matt. Also want to remind everybody that today's episode of the Bookish Hour is brought to you by Trixie Silvertail. And Trixie really is a sweetheart. And Trixie, we love you to death. And thank you for sponsoring tonight's episode. Trixie's upcoming release, Wheels and Dirty Deals, will take amateur sleuth Mitzi Moon into an undercover gig in the rough and tumble world of roller derby. Wheels and Dirty Deals is available for pre-order in all Amazon stores. So there we go, roller derby. It's going to be fun. But Matt, one of the things that I'm curious about in the book, your most recent release, is Mainly Mayhem. And, we've talked a little bit about cultural differences, to a certain degree, maybe kind of class differences about life in Maine. This book starts with Langdon being asked to investigate, a pillar of the community. And things suddenly, mayhem ensues, shall we say. Can you talk to us a little bit about Mainly Mayhem and kind of what goes on in this most recent in this series?
Yeah, well, I mentioned it in the Port Essex Booth Bay Harbor analogy, but Brunswick has some of the similar things where you've got, some real working class blue collar sorts. But in the midst of it, you also have Bowdoin College, which is an elite college. Uh, and, so the mix of these two things, as well as some summer wealth that moves here and spends the summer and whatnot out on some beautiful ocean, lots and whatnot. So there is that real polarization between the two. And so, this is sort of the beginning of the story. As you said, Langdon is asked to investigate the background of Judge Remington, who the President of the United States is nominating for the Supreme Court. And as Langdon digs into this, he finds out that back in his Bowdoin College days, there was a group of four of them that would hang out that were all from Maine. And many people from Bowdoin College are not from Maine, obviously, but the four of them were from Maine, and they called themselves the Maine Men of Mayhem. And was it just harmless pranks, or did it border on something more? And if it did border on something more, do threads of this continue to run up through the last 30 years of his, working his way up through the judicial system to the Court of Appellate and being nominated for the highest bench in the land? And Langdon is no sooner into this and finding some questionable activity than he's pulled off it. And the White House counsel and the assistant chief of staff tell him, okay, send us a bill, you're done. We're going to move forward with this. And he's like, why is this being fast tracked? Why is this moving so quickly? And so he's going to continue to investigate on his own.
I love the premise of this investigation. I think it's so unique in kind of the mystery field itself. Just because, we're not dealing with a, stumbling across a dead body right off the bat. It's a really unique way to pull the reader in, especially to the political component to it. And so we actually have a question from one of our viewers, Matt, that kind of parries off of what I'm trying to get to. But DHB is wondering, did your time in middle school help your imagination for developing murder plots? And my question is, how did you come up with this kind of political thriller aspect of Goff's sixth installment?
I guess the question was teaching middle school, right?
Yes.
Not my days as
not in middle school, yeah.
Because
thinking way back to then.
I thought about killing people back in my days in middle school too. That maybe bullied me or whatnot. So, but if we're moving on to the teaching aspect of things, I don't know how much that really helps me with anything other than character development.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a lot of crime plots that I've spawned that came from teaching middle school, but whether it be other teachers or the students, and let's face it, wondering what little Billy's going to grow up to be.
Mm-hmm.
And the concerns that you might have going down a certain path, or what's little Susie going to end up doing, or who might be going down a totally opposite path, and where is that going to bring them? And so I think one of the great things about developing characters is to understand who they are, and going back as far as their middle school days might be a really important facet of knowing who they are and why they are who they are now. So I guess that to that extent, that's probably most of what helped me form from the middle school. What was the second part of that question?
So how did you develop this really kind of ingenious way of having a mystery woven into the fact that Goff's case is this kind of vetting of a potential Supreme Court justice? I just thought it was like, wow, this is such a cool, unique plot line. Where did it come from?
Yeah, well, I think, it is not a hatchet job, but the idea was spawned with the began with the Judge Kavanaugh hearings.
Ripped from the headlines.
And, it got me interested in the whole process
Mhm.
of, vetting. And, I'm not political in this at all. As a matter of fact, the president who has done this, plays a very small role, is a Democratic president who's nominated this person. And nobody's trying to, well, maybe some people are trying to, but it's not a politically based, it's a power-based move. And so this Judge Remington, Langdon discovers that there's some pranks and mayhem in his past. And as he digs deeper, we will come across a couple bodies that might be tied to his past. And whether they're tied to him or some of the other main men of mayhem or some other people entirely, we'll leave that up to reading the book and getting to the end of it. But, things get darker and deeper as we go. But it is, one of my lighter books, probably the book before this, in Mainly Wicked. Shabal is still recovering from her ordeal at the hands of the Wendigo in Mainly Wicked, in Mainly Mayhem. And that's one of the themes of this book, is her recovering from this horrible incident that happened in the previous book to her.
Can you,
in that, go ahead, Sarah.
I just need, I would just love some education on my part, because while I was reading her point of view in Mainly Mayhem, kind of this trauma that she's dealing with, can you explain what the Wendigo is? Because that was something that I wasn't familiar with, and kind of had to look up on my own to figure out what where this is pulling from.
Well, first of all, when my wife read it, she said, "What dark place were you in when you wrote this?" But a Wendigo is a mythological figure of the Native Americans. It's argued where it started. So some would say the Abenakis in Maine, some other places over above Indiana, some of the Native Americans over there, about this insatiable creature that devours human flesh. And so we do not get into the supernatural, mythical, actual Wendigo, but we do get into somebody who calls himself the Wendigo.
Ooh. That's a really good name for a bad guy.
Yeah. And that kind of tees up my question perfectly, Sarah, is that you're 6 books into this series. And so yes, that as we start reading Mainly Mayhem, if you've not read the previous books, you're thinking, okay, what happened to this poor woman? And so you clearly are writing your books where plot lines carry over. It's not like good old episodic TV where we're starting over from square one, like good old Jessica Fletcher got to do from Cabot Cove, Maine. Real place, right? Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't help
It's
myself.
Boot Bay Harbor, Port Essex, Cabot Cove.
But so when you started out writing, Langdon's stories, did you plan to write a series? And if so, how far out? And can you maybe talk about some of the good things and maybe some of the challenges of writing a series and having those story arcs continue from one book to the next? Because that's not easy to do.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I do think that every one of these books, the plot is completed at the end of the book. So the plot, whether it's, vetting a Maine Supreme Court justice or a crack at a nuclear power plant, we come to fulfillment at the end of that as far as the plot goes. But the fact of the matter is the characters are all, going to grow and change and progress and live through the series as well. So that is a place where, if you're not really beholden to book 4 in the series, I would say you should start with book 1, because you develop with the characters. And this particular book, I wasn't able to ignore what happened with the Wendigo. So I do delve into that past a little bit, and that was one of the more intense scenes. So I did have to do that. But overall, you grow with the characters. Some characters are going to come up missing because they don't make it and whatnot. So I think that is really where plots, go from book to book is in the character development.
And I'm glad that you chose to do that because, and this is something that when I was kind of first doing my research in the cozy mystery genre, after I'd been reading cozies and absolutely loving them, and then made that decision of like, I'm going to write one. For me, one thing that I always noticed was a little bit, I guess, overlooked in some instances is the fact that like our characters are often stumbling across dead bodies, and like that's traumatic in itself, and all the things that they go through in their investigations. But then you go to the next book and it's like, oh, like everything's hunky-dory. I don't have any trauma, nightmares, or anything to do with this. And actually, it wasn't until I read JC's Alley Cobb Mysteries where his sleuth is having she's actively going to therapy because of the fact that, she's gone through these horrific instances. And I was like, this is the type of thing that we need more, at least in the cozy mystery genre, because it helps that character development and it helps it seem real. And the fact that like our sleuths can go up, see a body, and react more as one would expect rather than be like, oh, another body, like time to call the police. Right. I think that makes what makes a cozy and any book in general more relatable and more that connection to the reader. And right away in Chabal's case, where I had not interacted with her before. Mainly Mayhem was the first book that I had read, and immediately I was drawn to her story because of what she was going through and that raw emotion and that pain. Even though I wasn't sure all of where it had come from or how, it still is just like such a moving experience. And I'm wondering, Matt, how did it feel to write those scenes or those chapters from her point of view versus from Goff's point of view?
Yeah, it's absolutely terrifying to, mess something like that up, to write another gender and make sure that you do it justice and you don't follow into the stereotypes. And then to up it the ante so that you're telling it from the experience of somebody who's gone through an ordeal that is more terrifying than just about anybody ever has. And to try and portray that on the pages, it was very difficult. I was very excited when I completed the fireside scene. I thought I did that pretty well, and we'll let readers get to that on their own. But so yeah, it's a scary, terrifying thing to do, but we've got to do it. We've got to get into other people's heads, and I can't just write about 58-year-old males.
Do you have, and JC, this is something that I think you can provide some education on as well. What are some tips for writing? I tend to stay away from, I do have one series where I do have a character that is male that I write from his point of view, but that's few and far between. What are some tips that you guys have for effectively, putting yourself in that space?
Matt, I'll let you go first.
Don't all answer at once.
Well, no, I mean, I'm more than happy to, because I've written 9 books from a woman's point of view. And I think, one of the things that I always tell people is that, I'm from a large Irish Catholic family. I'm the youngest of 8. I have 5 older sisters. So I grew up in an environment with a lot of women. And so in such a way even that my oldest sister jokes that she raised me as much as my mom did. So I think fortunately for me, I was raised in an environment where you respect women. And one of the things that I've always tried to think about is when I'm in the head of a female character is trying to figure out who that person is. That the most important thing initially is to figure out, not get hung up on male or female or, non-binary or whatever, but who that person is and try to understand that character as a whole person and not a caricature. And also, I will admit that early in my writing, my wife has given me a lot of help. Because she would look at some of my early drafts and she would say, dude, no, a woman wouldn't think that, or a woman wouldn't say that. So, I think one of the other things for me in particular writing women or females is, don't hesitate or don't be scared to ask somebody from another gender or from another background, hey, is this real? Because as much as we want to be empathetic to characters in our stories, the reality is, it's like, Matt, I'm one on you. I'm a 59-year-old dude. So, I have to, and that's another point. I think it's important to recognize our limitations and understand, okay, well, when do I need help? When do I need advice? Who can I talk to about suggestions? And I think to a certain degree, it's not unlike writing people from different generations. With you, Sarah. I mean, we've joked about the fact that I'm old enough to be your dad. And so it's not always easy for me to write somebody who is in their 20s or 30s. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying I think it's about respecting the character, respecting, who they are first, and then getting input from others. So what do you think, Matt?
I'll probably have a much shorter answer because I haven't done it nearly as much as you have. And, I'll say everything you said was right. But
Thank you.
I, I guess when I write from a woman's perspective, as I think about it now, I always have very powerful women. So there might be a frail woman in the story, but I don't tell it from her perspective because I would worry that that would get me in more trouble. And I wouldn't want to do that. So in most of my books, when I tell the story from the woman's perspective, they're very powerful women. And that doesn't mean that they're always good. Sometimes they're very powerfully bad. And, there's a mix of those two things. But, I think that women are very strong. And so I put the emphasis on that strength that so many women possess, and, whether it be for good or bad. So that's the little tidbit that I can add to all your great answers.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a great point though, Matt, is because readers, I think both as readers or viewers, we are drawn to characters who drive action. And it doesn't matter who you are or what your background is or what your color is or whatever, what gender it is. If as authors we can write characters that are driving the action, that's what we need to do.
Absolutely.
I really like your part about respect, JC, that you mentioned, because I'm thinking about when I'm writing Captain Solomon in my Court of Mystery series. Mm-hmm. I know him as himself. Like, I know his character and I respect the decisions that he makes. And I don't really ever think about the fact that he's a man. And just like that, he is who he is. And so I think that's a really nice baseline to start from, is having that respect for your character and moving forward from there. So that was some good insight, you guys. Thank you for sharing.
Hey. We have a few ideas up here. We have a few little gray cells that are still working, even at 59 years old. So, Matt, this has been so cool. I appreciate you hanging out with us. Sarah does too. Our time is short. So I do want to ask before, our time runs out, what's next for Langdon?
I'm not sure what will be next for Langdon. I haven't put my mind that way yet, but I currently have 5 different series going. So
Oh, wow.
just today, I finished the first draft. I wrote a little two-page epilogue to add on to the sixth book in my Port Essex Clay Wolf Trap series. In April, with a new publisher, Level Best Books, I have a new series beginning. There's a three-book contract, and it's more of a thriller series. The,
Ooh.
the title of that one is The Not So Merry Adventures of Max Creed. And it's a modern day Robin Hood story where he and a band of people are fighting to bring justice to those wronged by the ultra wealthy.
Oh, sign me up.
Oh, wow.
There you go.
Is that going to take place in Maine, or where's the setting for that one?
That one is, much more of a thriller than my other series, which
Mhm.
are all mystery series. It's more a race against time sort of thing to stop the baddie as opposed to find out who it is. And it's based in New York City.
Oh, nice.
Right, their offices are right by Bryant Park,
Ooh,
and but it's very much an international thing.
ooh, fun.
Max Fried is also very wealthy. How he came upon that wealth is, part of the story. So we'll let you read that. But he kind of jet sets around the world and playing cat and mouse with these ultra wealthy billionaires who have been abusing people.
Nice.
Wow, that
Nice.
sounds very
That's
thrilling.
cool.
I love that name,
Yeah.
Max Creed, as well. That's a good
Mhm.
name.
Yeah. Sarah, this is, I am so out of practice. Matt, we took a couple of weeks off for the holidays, and it's January, it's cold, my brain's not working yet. We need to have you back when it's summer and I can actually think and not stumble over my words. But as our time is kind of coming to a close, we want to kind of talk about what we're reading, what we're watching, what we're kind of soaking in media wise. So, Sarah, what do you got for us this time around?
Yes, what do I have? So everybody knows, our longtime viewers know that I'm a huge true crime fan. I recently started watching a documentary about the son of Sam, which I realized while watching it that I had no idea. I guess I'd never listened to a podcast about the son of Sam before because I didn't know really anything about it. Everything that I thought, I was like, oh, turned on my head. But this documentary really kind of pushes the envelope in saying that the son of Sam was not just one individual, but perhaps a whole like movement that kind of the
Mm.
police and or larger conspiracies at work kind of kept quiet from the public. And so that's been very enjoyable. I believe we've been watching that on Netflix. Also just started watching The Silk Road, which is it's death or drugs, death, and the dark web. I listened to a podcast about the Silk Road a while back from the show Case File, and it blew my mind. I had never heard of Silk Road before, which, for those of you who maybe have been like me and don't know about it, it was basically think Amazon on the dark web for illegal drugs. And like the fact that people are just shipping drugs all over the world, buying them on this Silk Road, and the crazy hunt to find who the mastermind behind the Silk Road was. And it is a wild plot. I was like, this truth is stranger than fiction, because to me, it was just like a plot right out of a book. Very, very eye-opening. And so those are the two true crime documentaries that I've been watching. On the fictional front, just watched Alien Romulus, which was, we liked it. I think we liked it. I thought it could have ended 20 minutes earlier than it did. But I was on board, and I am interested to see where they take the universe, because I think that they set it up really nicely. So those are some very not cozy recommendations for our readers. On book-wise, I highly recommend Death and Diamonds by S.J. Bennett. It's the fourth book in her Majesty the Queen Investigates series, which I absolutely love. You follow Queen Elizabeth. This time she is a 30-year-old Queen Elizabeth. There are two murders in Chelsea. Her husband may or may not be linked to them. And she goes undercover to, well, not undercover, but she goes and discreetly tries to investigate. So highly recommend checking that one out. JC, what about you?
So last time we were all here, I was lamenting the fact that I just couldn't read because it was new job, new year, all that kind of stuff. I finally actually got my reading vibe back. So want to send a shout out to John Scalzi's Starter Villain. It's a kind of a crime sci-fi send up on imagine if the entire world of bad guys was controlled by a small number of people whose entire lives were spent as villains. And our main character finds out that his uncle was a villain, and he gets pulled into this world. And it's a lot of fun. It features cats who are super smart and can type. It also features dolphins that want to unionize. And so, as like all books that I like to have, the good guys went out in the end. So that's Starter Villain. The cover is adorable too because it's got a cat, and y'all know I just love my cats. So I finished that. Also last night finished Lucky You, another Carl Hiaasen novel. This one is about two different groups of people who both win lottery tickets, and how the bad guys try to steal somebody else's ticket and make off with all the money. And it's just insane, over the top. It's also very timely because of a couple of reasons that I'm not going to get into here. I'll just say go back and read it, but only read it after you've bought all of Matt's books and read all of those. As far as what I'm watching, just started watching Person of Interest. So the old, I forget what it was originally on, Jim Caviezel and Michael Emerson. The gist is Michael Emerson created this big surveillance tool that kind of got out of control, and now he and Jim Caviezel are trying to use that tool to right wrongs and save people from bad stuff. So it's kind of interesting, kind of thriller, sci-fi-ish also. So, Matt, what about you?
I got a little late onto the bandwagon of being on the show tonight because currently I'm reading #Tag Me for Murder.
That's a great book.
And I'm about 3/4 of the way through, and I'm enjoying the story of Coco and Hudson and Jasper and Charlotte. So it's
oh my gosh, thank
reason,
you.
So yeah, I'm enjoying it. I'm kind of with JC, and it's kind of hard to understand 28-year-olds in a beach community, hashtagging and Instagramming and living off of social media. But I do my best, but I enjoy the characters a lot, and it's really a fun read. So
well, thank you. I was like, that book sounds familiar.
Yeah, you were blank for a second when I said it, and your lights went off.
Yes.
And I do have Panic in the Panhandle in the queue.
All right,
ready to go because I'm looking forward to that as well. I saw the comparison to Carl Hiaasen, who's a hero of mine. So that was the one I chose of yours. And I'm sorry that I didn't get through both of them before I came on the show, but I will make it. I recently finished a book by another Maine writer who is much like Bruce Coffin's John Byron, has a detective in Portland, Maine, D. Rommel, and this was called 7 Days. And this author, Jules Selbo, is writing a countdown. So she's done 10 days, 9 days, 8 days.
Oh, wow.
7 days was, it's not actually out yet. She asked me to read and do a blurb for it, and it was fantastic. I read and loved the first 3, so I think she was comfortable asking me to say kind words about it. And this is all balanced against, for some reason, my wife and I have started watching The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu.
Ooh.
And we're 2 years of episodes in now, and we're really kind of drawn and depressed about it all at the same time. So if either of you have seen that, tell me that, she starts resisting or fighting back, or something more promising happens than just another gritty ending after another gritty ending.
I couldn't bring myself to watch it, so I've never watched an episode.
We watched, I think, probably 4 or 5 episodes and had to give up because it was like, this is too depressing. Like it was too much.
It's so well done, but
it is.
I go to bed just depressed every night. You know, if I wanted to do that, I could watch the news.
Yes. Yes.
Exactly.
Oh man, yes, that one's a doozy. I just remember when we were driving, so we were driving to Maine for the holidays, and we stopped off, I think, at a rest stop in Massachusetts, and it was Christmas morning, and the person behind the counter was just like, "Blessed be the fruit," and we're just like, "What? Where? Like, what happened?" And he was in a Handmaid's Tale onesie. I was like, "Where are we?
Oh,
like, what
wow.
happened?" So they were having some fun with it. And we actually have Farmhouse Reader in the chat saying, I tried the first episode but couldn't get through it. So, Matt, it sounds like you've made it a lot farther than any of us have. So best of luck, and let us.
So if I give it up, I gave it a good game effort.
You did very much so. And speaking of good game effort, this has been this has just been a fabulous evening. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us this evening. It's always really, really special to connect with other mystery authors and talk about your process, talk about your inspirations. For folks that want to stay connected with you, where can they find you other than your website, which we do have in our show notes?
Well, first of all, you know, one of the highlights of being a writer is chatting with other authors such as yourselves and podcasters and coming on a show like this. And what a fun hour it's been. But yes, you know, my website and my social media links all have my name. So the website is mattcost.net. Facebook is mattcost.3. So Instagram changes a little bit, and I put my middle name in there because I signed up way too early, and now I don't know how to change it. Maybe I can ask Coco.
Yes.
Coco could probably help me with that. But it's Langdon Cost. So, you know, you get Cost in most of these things, and you can find me at any of those places.
Fabulous.
Excellent. Yeah. I just want to echo what Sarah said, Matt. This has been fabulous. Thank you for, sharing, Langdon with us, some of the history lessons, some of the geography lessons about Maine. And I promise, my wife and I are going to make it up there, sooner rather than later. And I just want to let everybody else know that today's episode of the Bookish Hour was brought to you all by the wonderful and talented Trixie Silvertail. You can find her upcoming release, Wheels and Dirty Deals, in both ebook and paperback formats in all Amazon stores. For the latest about Trixie, check out her website at www.trixiesilvertail. That's Trixie, silver, and then tail is TALE.com. So that's what I got. Matt, thanks again. Sarah, it's been fab.
It has been fabulous. And for our wonderful viewers who joined us here live this evening, we always appreciate your feedback, your comments, and the fun that you have with us. Susan, you're very welcome. We appreciate your thanks and very much look forward to our next episode, which, if I'm doing my math correctly, is going to be next week. We have a bookish moment with Dawn M. Barkley is going to be joining us talking about her new suspense thriller. So we will be back with more fun. Again, Matt, thank you so much for being here this evening. It was absolutely wonderful. We hope that you'll come back and share and talk with us about your new Max Creed series when the time comes. It would be fabulous to have you back and see what adventures are in store.
Well, it was a fantastic time, and I'd be happy to come back. So we'll talk about that and whenever you like.
Wonderful.
Excellent.
Love to hear it. And until we see all of our wonderful viewers again, stay bookish, everyone. Have a fabulous night. Bye-bye.